The morning sun spread a pale golden light over the wide Wyoming plains, brushing the tall grass with warmth and illuminating the rugged hills that stretched beyond the horizon. A dry wind came sweeping from the west, carrying with it the dusty scent of the trail and the faint echo of hooves from somewhere far off. The small frontier town of Clearwater Ridge had just begun to wake. A blacksmith hammered the first sparks of the day. A saloon keeper opened his doors with a wide yawn, and a handful of horses nickered from their stalls. But Clayton Hale, known around these parts simply as the Silent Cowboy, had been awake long before sunrise. He stood at the edge of the dirt road leading into town, had pulled low, thumbs tucked into his belt, his lean figure motionless, like a statue carved by the frontier itself. The only sign of movement was the muscle that flexed now and then in his jaw, a quiet betrayer of the nerves he refused to show on his face. For months, he had waited for this day, for the wagon that carried his mail-order bride, a woman he had never met, but whose letters he'd read so many nights by the dim lantern light that he knew every word by heart. She had written about longing for peace, about wanting a simple life, far from the expectations and noise of the East. She sounded kind, gentle, intelligent, someone who might finally fill the empty silence of his lonely ranch. A partner, a companion, a chance at something he never admitted he needed. Clayton exhaled slowly, boots shifting in the dusty earth as he watched the empty horizon. But even as he waited, something unsettled him, a heaviness in the air, a whisper of something unexpected riding on the wind. He didn't know that fate had a different plan, and that the woman arriving today was not the one he had been writing to. Not even close. The wagon appears. By late morning, the sound of creaking wheels rose from the distance, soft at first, then growing steadily louder. Clayton straightened, heartbeat thickening in his chest. His horse, Dustfoot, lifted his head and flicked his ears toward the sound. The wagon came into view, drawn by two tired-looking horses, covered in travel dust. It was an old prairie schooner, canvas faded by sun and wind. Clayton frowned. This wasn't the stagecoach he'd been told she would arrive on. This was a family wagon, a settler's wagon. Then he saw movement inside. At first, it was just a silhouette, a slender form leaning forward. But as the wagon rolled closer, the details sharpened, and Clayton's confusion deepened. It wasn't a young woman with a polished bonnet and neatly folded hands. This woman wore a plain, worn dress. Dust streaked her sleeves and skirt. Her dark brown hair hung loose from its pins, wind-tangled and tired. But it was her eyes that struck him, wide, cautious, and filled with a fear she tried to hide. And then he saw the children. 4 of them. A boy around 10, sitting at the wagon's edge, watching the town with wary eyes. A girl of maybe 8 clutching a ragged doll. Another boy, younger, peeking over the wagon rail. And in the woman's arms, a baby, no older than a year, his small hand gripping her collar. Clayton felt the ground shift under his boots. What in God's name? The wagon stopped in front of him. The horses snorted, exhausted. The woman looked at him like someone afraid to breathe. Clayton tipped his hat slowly. Ma'am. Her lips parted. She swallowed. Are you Mr. Clayton Hale? Yes, ma'am. That'd be me. The silence between them stretched. Clayton waited for the explanation he knew was coming. Instead, she whispered, I'm the one you're here to meet. Everything inside Clayton snapped still. No, this wasn't right. This wasn't her. His intended bride was named Eleanor Wells, a schoolteacher from Boston. Refined, educated, single. This woman, this mother, was none of those things. He stepped closer, voice steady but firm. There seems to be a mistake. I'm expecting Miss Eleanor Wells. You ain't her. The woman lowered her eyes, her shoulders trembling. I know I'm not the woman you wrote letters to. Her voice cracked. But she didn't come. Clayton felt a breath leave his chest. What do you mean she didn't come? The woman hesitated, clutching the baby tighter as if the truth itself might break her. She sent me instead. When the truth unravels, the children slid down from the wagon, gathering close to their mother. The oldest boy stepped slightly in front of her, as though shielding her from Clayton. Clayton respected the instinct. The woman took a shaky breath. I'm Miriam Ward. My husband died 6 months ago. Consumption. Her fingers trembled against the baby's back. I sold what little we had left to make this trip. Eleanor, your intended bride, she's my cousin. She was supposed to come west, but her father changed his mind. He forbade her from leaving. Clayton felt frustration rise, hot and sharp. And so she what? Sent you in her place. His voice held disbelief. Miriam nodded weakly. She said you were a good man, decent, hard-working. She told me you needed help on your ranch, and that maybe you wouldn't turn away a woman with children who had nowhere else to go. Clayton's jaw clenched. Hard. So that's what this was. He had been a solution, an escape route, for a desperate widow. He was being asked to take responsibility for a stranger and her family, for kids, a woman he'd never met, a life he'd never expected. And yet, as he looked at her, dusty and exhausted from what must have been hundreds of miles of harsh travel, something shifted inside him. Something he didn't want to feel. Sympathy. The kind that cut deep. Miriam kept her eyes lowered, as though expecting him to shout, or send her away, or call her a liar. Clayton did none of those things. Instead, he asked quietly, "How long since you've eaten?" She blinked in surprise. "Yesterday morning." Clayton let out a breath that wasn't quite anger, but close to it. "Kids too." She nodded again. He swore under his breath, soft, but sharp. It would take a heart of stone to send them back into the wilderness. And while Clayton Hale was many things, he was not heartless. A decision no cowboy expected to make. Clayton walked around the wagon, checking the wheels, the horses, the condition of the children. The more he saw, the heavier the weight settled in his chest. The children were thin, the horses near collapse. The baby's cheeks were sunken from hunger. And Miriam, she looked like she'd been holding herself together with nothing but prayer. Clayton scrubbed a hand over his face. "This ain't what I planned," he muttered. Miriam's voice came out a whisper. "I know that I'm sorry. I never wanted to deceive you. I had no choice." She looked at her children, pain and love written across every tired line of her face. "I couldn't let them starve." Clayton stared at her for a long moment. He thought of his ranch, quiet, spacious, empty. He thought of the long nights, the cold dinners, the silent mornings. He thought of the loneliness that lingered like a shadow in every corner of his home. And now, standing before him, was the opposite of loneliness. Chaos, noise, life. He took a long breath. "You and the kids, you'll need food, water, rest. And this wagon won't make it another 10 miles. Miriam lowered her head. "I understand." Then Clayton said the words that surprised even himself. "You'll come with me." Her head snapped up. What?" Clayton gestured toward his horse. "I ain't about to leave you here. My ranch is a day's ride west. You'll stay there until we figure out what comes next." Tears filled her eyes, but she blinked them back, refusing to cry. "Thank you, Mr. Hale. Truly." Clayton nodded once. "But understand this." His voice grew firm, steady as bedrock. "I didn't ask for a wife with 4 kids. I ain't promising marriage. Not yet." Miriam swallowed and nodded. "I'm not asking for anything except a chance to survive." Clayton held her gaze, a fragile, tired, desperate gaze, and something inside him twisted. "Then let's get you all home," he said quietly. The journey to a new life. By late afternoon, they set out west. Clayton rode ahead with Dustfoot, while Miriam and the children followed in the wagon. The road was rough, the sun relentless, but for the first time in days, Miriam's shoulders eased just a little. The children even began whispering softly among themselves, pointing at wildflowers and hawks circling overhead. The baby slept in her lap, rocked by the wagon's rhythm. When they reached the ridge overlooking Clayton's ranch, the sky was painted orange and gold. Below them lay acres upon acres of open fields, a large wooden barn, fenced pastures, and a sturdy ranch house with a wide porch. Miriam gasped softly. "It's beautiful." Clayton glanced at her, really looked at her, and saw something he hadn't expected. Hope. Fragile, trembling, but alive. "Welcome to Hale Ranch," he said quietly. Miriam looked at him, exhaustion giving way to something else. "Thank you for giving us a chance." Clayton didn't answer, because he wasn't sure he had the words. But deep down, he knew one thing. His life had just changed in a way he never saw coming. And the real story, the one fate had written for him, was only just beginning. The sun dipped low behind the Wyoming hills, leaving streaks of amber and deep violet across the sky. As the evening breeze swept over Hale Ranch, the land took on a quiet, almost sacred calm. The cattle mooed softly in the distance, the windmill creaked in its steady rhythm, and the wooden porch groaned under Clayton Hale's boots as he guided Miriam and her 4 children inside. Yet despite the peaceful scenery, Clayton felt anything but calm. This was supposed to be the day he welcomed his intended bride, a woman he had planned a future with, even if that future had been based on letters and hope. But instead, a widowed mother with 4 hungry children now walked through his front door. Clayton rubbed the back of his neck, wondering what his quiet home would become now. The house that had never known children. "Kids," Miriam called gently, keeping her voice steady for their sake. "Stay close to me." Clayton opened the door, revealing a simple but clean living space. A long wooden table stood in the center, and a cast-iron stove rested against the far wall. A single rocking chair sat by the fireplace, its cushion old but well-kept. The children stepped inside cautiously, eyes wide as they took in the unfamiliar setting. The youngest boy whispered, "Ma, it's so big." Clayton raised an eyebrow. The house wasn't big by any stretch, but compared to a cramped wagon, he supposed it was a palace. "You're free to look around," Clayton said, softer than he meant to. The children froze, surprised by his tone. They looked to Miriam for permission. She nodded. "Go on." They moved carefully, touching nothing, speaking in hushed voices, as though afraid the house might swallow them whole. Miriam shifted the baby in her arms. The child fussed, clearly hungry. "I'll fix supper," Clayton said, stepping toward the stove. "You just sit. You look about ready to fall over." Her face flushed with embarrassment. "I can cook, Mr. Hale. I don't want to trouble you." Clayton gave her a steady look. "You and the kids haven't eaten properly in days. You're a guest here. Let me do this." Her lips parted, but she didn't argue. She sank into the rocking chair with a sigh of exhaustion. Clayton rolled up his sleeves and began preparing beans, biscuits, and salted beef. Simple ranch food, but warm and filling. The children watched as the smell filled the room, their stomachs growling audibly. When he placed the food on the table, the oldest boy's eyes darted between Clayton and Miriam. "Go ahead," Clayton said gently. "There's enough for all of you." For a moment, the boy hesitated, as if he couldn't believe it. Then he dug in, and the other children followed. Miriam whispered, "Thank you. You've no idea how much this means to us." Clayton didn't respond. He wasn't sure he knew how to handle gratitude. Instead, he nodded once and took the seat farthest from everyone. He wasn't used to company, especially not small, loud, unpredictable company. But as he watched the children eat, watched life return to their faces, Clayton felt an unfamiliar warmth stirring in his chest. It had been a long time since this house had felt alive. A widow's quiet confession. After supper, the children fell asleep quickly, one on the rug, another leaning against the rocking chair, and the oldest two huddled near the hearth. Miriam covered them with the small blankets Clayton provided, her fingers brushing their hair with a tenderness that softened even Clayton's tough exterior. When the children were settled, Miriam stepped out onto the porch. Clayton followed, keeping a respectful distance. The night air was cool, and the stars spread across the sky like a blanket of silver dust. Miriam exhaled shakily. "I owe you the truth, all of it." Clayton crossed his arms. "I reckon that'd be best." She held the baby close, rocking gently. "When my husband Thomas was alive, we lived on a small homestead outside St. Louis. He was a good man, but sickness comes for good men too." Her voice trembled. "After he passed, everything fell apart. His family blamed me for not saving him, though the doctor said nothing could have been done." Clayton's jaw tightened. He'd seen grief twist people cruel. "We lost our home," Miriam continued. "I worked where I could, laundry, sewing, anything. But it wasn't enough for all 4 children." Clayton didn't interrupt. He sensed she needed to let these words go. "I wrote letters to Eleanor, your bride-to-be, for help. She offered me her ticket west. She said you'd be a kind man, and I was desperate enough to believe her." She looked up at him, eyes glistening. "I didn't come to trick you, Mr. Hale. I came because my children needed hope." Clayton leaned against the porch post, staring out at the darkened fields. "You put me in a hard place, Miriam," he said quietly, "but I can't fault you for trying to save your family." Her breath hitched. "Does that mean you want us to leave? After a few days' rest?" Clayton didn't answer right away. He watched the lantern glow spill through the window and fall across the sleeping faces of the children. Kids who hadn't known safety in months. A woman who had fought across states just to keep them alive. Leaving them with nowhere to go. It wasn't in him. "No," he said finally. "You can stay. All of you. For as long as it takes to figure out what comes next." Miriam's eyes filled with tears. She didn't try to hide. "Clayton, I don't know how to thank you." "You don't have to," he murmured. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was deep, quiet, like 2 storms slowly settling. A ranch that needed helping hands. The next morning brought new challenges and new routines. Clayton woke before sunrise, as always, and stepped out to feed the livestock. To his surprise, the oldest boy, Jacob, was already there, trying to lift a bucket half his size. "You don't have to do that," Clayton said. Jacob shook his head stubbornly. "I want to earn our stay, sir. Ma says nothing in this world comes free." Clayton respected that. "You help me with the barn chores," he said. "But no heavy lifting. Your arms ain't grown yet." Jacob's face lit up. Inside the house, Miriam swept the floors, washed dishes, and tended the baby. The little girl, Anna, followed her, humming softly. The younger boy, Matthew, watched Clayton with wide eyes from the doorway, clutching a tin cup. Clayton found himself chuckling. He hadn't had a house with laughter in it since he was a child. The ranch slowly changed. Where there had been silence, there were now footsteps, voices, and the occasional crash of something falling. Where there had been emptiness, there was now warmth. Clayton also found Miriam's presence calming. She moved through the house with quiet strength. Even exhausted, she carried a grace that softened the rough edges of the room. Each evening, she read stories to the children by firelight, and Clayton, though he tried not to admit it, found himself lingering in the doorway just to listen. He wasn't used to this. He didn't know if he deserved it. But he didn't turn away from it either. Storm clouds on the horizon. One afternoon, as Clayton returned from repairing the fence line, he saw a cloud of dust rising on the eastern trail. It wasn't a stagecoach. It wasn't a trader. It was a single rider. A tall man in a dark coat. He rode with purpose, his horse pushing hard. Clayton felt his instincts prick immediately. Something about the man's posture, the cold determination, the way he surveyed the ranch. This was no friendly traveler. Miriam stepped outside, wiping her hands on her apron. When she saw the rider, the color drained from her face. No, it can't be. Clayton turned sharply. You know him? Her voice shook. Yes, that's Thomas's brother, Robert Ward. The horse stopped in a sudden cloud of dust. Robert Ward dismounted, his eyes narrowing on Clayton first, and then on Miriam and the children. There you are, Robert growled. I've come for them. Clayton stepped forward instantly, shoulders squared. This is my land, he said coolly, and you don't bark orders here. Robert sneered. Miriam is my late brother's wife. Those kids are my blood, and I'll be damned before I let some silent cowboy keep them. Miriam clutched the baby protectively. I'm not going with you, Robert. You know how your family treated us. Robert's jaw twitched. You belong with us, not with him. Clayton's voice turned like steel. They belong where they're safe, and that sure as hell ain't with you. Robert's hand hovered near his holster. This is an overhaul, he spat. I'll be back, and when I return, I'll be taking all of them with me. He mounted his horse and rode off, dust swallowing his figure. Miriam trembled, tears welling. Clayton turned to her, his voice low and steady. He ain't talking you, or the kids, I promise. Miriam stared at him, fear, relief, and something deeper shining through her tears. Why, she whispered. Why are you helping us this much? Clayton looked toward the horizon where Robert had disappeared. Because I don't let bullies take what don't belong to them, and because maybe you and the kids were meant to come here. Her breath caught. Clayton stepped closer. You're not alone anymore, Miriam. Not while I'm standing. A new beginning in the frontier wilderness. That night, the wind howled outside, but inside the house, warmth spread through every room. Clayton sat by the fire, polishing his rifle, not out of fear, but preparation. Miriam placed the baby in a small cradle Clayton had found in storage. Jacob and the younger children slept deeply, trusting the walls around them. And for the first time since arriving, Miriam felt safe. She stepped beside Clayton, her voice a soft murmur. Whatever happens next, thank you for protecting us. Clayton met her eyes. I ain't protecting strangers anymore, he said gently. You're part of this place now. Miriam's lips parted in quiet astonishment. For the first time in years, hope, not fear, filled her chest. And Clayton realized something too. His lonely ranch, his silent life, his empty home, had finally found its missing piece. Not a bride chosen through letters, not a woman he expected, but a family he never knew he needed.